welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm very excited to have Dani Klein Modisett on the program. She is a comedian and actor and author of the book Take My Spouse, Please, about how to create shared laughter to keep your marriage happy and healthy, and I can't wait to talk about that. That book was preceded by 2009's Afterbirth, Stories You Won't Read in Parents Magazine, another exciting topic, father of triplets here. Dani also taught stand-up at UCLA for 10 years. She has also coached keynote speakers, business leaders, congressional candidates, but don't hold that against her, on how to use humor more in their communication. She's also an actor currently recurring on the show Ghost for Stars. Her writing has appeared at AARP, New York Times, LA Times, Parents Magazine, and many websites. She's a graduate of Dartmouth College, very fancy school. Welcome to the program, Dani Klein Modisett. How are you, Dani?
Good, thank you. That's that introduction is always so fabulous. Like, this is your life.
Yeah,
love it.
You sound very impressive on paper.
I do, and yes, I'll just say yes and, Mike, because, you know, I'm all about the yes and improv. So
all about,
yes and.
Well, there we go. All about the yes and. I'll keep that in mind. So, Dani, I always like to say that this podcast is really about the stories behind the stories. And you've written a lot, you've performed a lot. I'm curious as to where your story begins. So where does your story begin?
Oh my! I was born a small. Let's see. I was born in New York City, and we moved to Connecticut in the mid '70s.
What part of? I have to ask. What part of Connecticut?
Oh, right, because you're in Connecticut.
I am.
That's right. So we moved to Westport, Connecticut.
Westport, okay, very good. Very fancy town, Westport is.
Yes. Well, it's less fancy then. Now it's like I don't even recognize it, but yes. Yes. And then what happened, I think, in terms of like the comedy epiphany, I just realized my whole family was depressed by this move. My mother was a born and raised New Yorker, and my father was like starting a new business. It was very depressing. And so I created puppets, little finger clay puppets that I used to try to make people laugh at the dinner table. And I was 9. So I think that my way of processing pain and discomfort instinctively has been, how can I make people laugh? There's got to be a way I can make people laugh.
Right.
And that would be like, so those are the beginnings. And then, of course, I did musical theater. I was a singer. I, was very involved with Staples High School players, for those of you. And then I went off to college, was a theater major, like what, why I didn't, wasn't a writer. I took some writing classes, but not nearly enough. And then I came to New York after college and worked for a comedy director named Jerry Zaks, who is about to launch 2 Broadway plays, The Music Man and Mrs. Doubtfire. They're like about to, come back, do the big Broadway comeback. And he taught me a ton. I followed him around for almost 2 years, and I learned a lot about the kind of science of comedy and how to break it down in the specifics. And then I went to acting school with William Esper, also very popular, the William Esper Studio in New York, for 2 years, all the while waiting tables. Thank you very much. And the thing is, so I was waiting tables, and people would say, met all these comedians, and they were like, why are you waiting tables? You should be doing stand-up. Like, you're kind of nuts. Like, why don't you use your nuttiness to not wait tables? How about that? And so I took a class. I moved to LA with $500, knowing 2 people. And I took a class in stand-up comedy at UCLA. And my teacher came up to me afterwards. Shelley Bonus is her name. She's a genius, like really out there, quirky lady, former wife of Richard Pryor. And she came up to me after class and she said, so you're a comedian. You can do this. You're just a comedian. So I don't know if you're going to do it for your life, but it's just who you are. And what's super interesting about that is that 10 years later, I went back and taught the class for another 10 years. And when I started teaching, I knew exactly what she meant. Like, there's some people that just, it's like, that's the lens that they see the world through is a little bit off, and they have a certain amount of charisma. And you're like, oh, well, you're a comic. You may never do it because it's a really crazy, hard life. but if you want it, it's available to you. And so, so then I did that.
Well, but before we go any further, tell me, before you took that class at UCLA, had you ever done an open mic? Had you ever been on stage? Have you ever tried it before?
No. But I had, when I was in Westport, I sang in nightclubs.
Yeah.
I know it sounds crazy, but I found like clubs, and I had a piano player, Paul Liacono, who like I reconnected with on Facebook. And the things, I looked very old when I was young. I really did. So I could go anywhere and play in clubs and, so I was used to dealing with an audience in that way, like singing and banter. But no, I hadn't gone to an open mic prior. I just took the class.
Well, walk me through the first time you went on stage to do comedy, right? Walk me through what that was like. Where was it? How much material did you have prepared? What was going through your mind at the time? I'm really curious to know that.
Oh my gosh, so fun. So we did this exercise that I now teach. So I came prepared with nothing. I just came in the room. And this is my favorite thing to do. And I do this like corporate now too, is you have the person come up in front of the group and the class shouts out adjectives that they get off the person just before they even talk. I mean, maybe I'll have people say hello, but sometimes I don't even have hello. And you just get this sense, because with comedy, as you know, like especially stand up, like your persona, like who are you, is really the spine on which you're gonna hang your jokes. And you can't divorce yourself from that. And ideally, it should be authentic. Whether you're gonna play against it, like what's gonna be funny is that you're gonna be the really prim, sweet girl who uses profanity, or, you're gonna be the tough like this who has a tiny dog that he loves, like whatever. Like, yeah, so you're laughing because it's the contrast, right? But you have to know who you are. So that's that first step. So going in there was like, that was the first thing. And I'm very comfortable on stage. Like COVID has been very hard for me because I really like an audience, and it's like, my family's like, enough with you with the need for an audience. Like 18 months with the same three people, I think is just, for someone who really likes to entertain. I really love to entertain. So, I mean, I will say I do have nerves still. Like I will feel sick before I go out there. But once I'm actually in front of people, I'm super happy. Like I'm just like, I'm home.
I go to a lot of, I used to go to a lot of open mics. Now there's these shows are starting to come back, but, and showcases too. And it's interesting when you see somebody starting out and then you see them grow and sort of, refine. How long do you think it takes for somebody to find out who they are? Because I don't think they know it sort of day one or even after year one. Like how long does it take, and what's that process of discovery like?
Well, it's interesting. So I used to have these panels come and speak at UCLA with like Paul Provenza and Margaret Cho and Caroline Ray, and they would all come and talk, and they would be like 10 years. So 10 years to find your voice. I think because I had been a performer, I came out of the gate a little bit ahead. But I think you have to, it takes a tremendous amount of patience. You can skip steps if you have writers. Like my understanding of Amy Schumer is that she had writers very early on who kind of could sense what was going to work for her and wrote toward that. But if you're discovering it on your own, you really have to have patience. Like 5 years, till you, and also depends on how old you are when you start. Presumably people who are older have a better sense of who they are already. But when you're younger, it's so much trial and error. It's so much failing publicly. And you have to get really comfortable with that process. I had been working in LA for a couple of years in like California clubs. And then I went to New York and I was booked at the comic strip, the one on 80th and 1st or something. And I went on stage and oh my goodness, they did not like me. And they were like, and I, used to wear a skirt and army boots because like the late 80s. No, it wasn't the late 80s. It was like the 90s. So I had the big boots on and the skirt. And it was like, nice dress. Like, get out of here. What? And I was like literally took my stuff and walked from the stage to the sidewalk and was like, I'm never doing that again. That's insanity. And then, of course, a week later I was back. So, and that's a comedian. You tank, and then you're like, all right, well, now I'm going to go back and try again.
Yeah, reflect if you could on just the importance of failing, and the importance of what role failing and bombing play in developing your act and your career.
Oh my goodness, it's everything. But I think it's everything in life, right? Like that's how you learn. Unfortunately, the painful experiences are what you learn from, you'll hear it. I mean, I actually tend to be someone who doesn't hear the laughs. Like the best tool for stand-up was recording every set. Mm-hmm. Because I will only remember the jokes that didn't work. And then I'm paralyzed with depression. But if I have evidence, hey, look, that one worked. That was better than I thought. Look at that. And of course, everything has to be adapted to your audience. Certain things are going to bomb in one audience. I was doing Alzheimer's material a couple of years ago when my mother was first diagnosed. And, I went to do it at the Improv on Melrose, and, like, seriously, they were looking at me like, what? For those of you who don't know, the Improv on Melrose is, like, date night and, like, people in 20s. And so I just said, like, you want to be taking notes. I know it's not funny now, but... And then I did a gig in the Valley, which is where families live and grown up people in their 40s and 50s, and, like, destroyed because they were just like, thank you for telling the truth about this experience. So, again, it comes down to knowing your audience, and sometimes you're going to feel your way around and get to know them in the moment by what doesn't work. And then you got to go, oh, well, that's not working. Okay, they're not into that. Let me use my other material. But yeah, that's the only way you learn. The only way you learn in stand-up is failing.
And then, the other thing I'm curious about is like the importance of sort of the network you generate and your peers sort of supporting you. So who are some of the people you started coming up with during that? When you were first starting out, it sounds like it was late 80s, early 90s.
Well, I actually did a lot of shows with Chelsea Handler.
Okay.
We all performed at a place called Luna Park. And my friend, may he rest in peace, Sam Brown, I don't know if you remember Sam, he was a brilliantly talented guy who passed away of pancreatic cancer. But he used to run a room at Luna Park every Tuesday night for years. And that was Brian Callen. I mean, people that, I'm just trying to think of who... Janine Garofalo. I mean, these people would come through, and but that was my core. My core group was Marla Schultz, a New York comic. I'm just trying to think of all of them, but that was the kind of core group, and some went on to do. There was another show in LA called Pretty Funny Women, run by Lisa Sunstedt. We all did a lot of those shows. She still teaches. Let's see, Stephanie Wilder Taylor. She had a show on Nickelodeon for a while. She's a comedy writer as well. And I think, one, in terms of like building a community, I think there's this misperception that comedians are so cutthroat they're not going to support each other. And some of that's true. But one of my first gigs early on was a trip to Guam to open for a comedian. And my friend Jan Karam had gotten the job. And she didn't want it. She didn't want to go. It was for Miller Lite. I have the poster right here. She didn't want to go. And she was like, do you want it? And I was like, Guam? Of course. I had like 10 minutes of material. I was like, all right, I'll go to Guam. So I went, and, I learned great lessons then that I still do to this day, which is when you land somewhere, you get the paper, like read about the community so that you can open with something that immediately hooks the audience and they feel like you've taken the time to get to know them a little bit. So say they had a political crisis going on there that was ridiculous. So, I made a couple of jokes right at the top about that, and then I was in. You want to get your first laugh. But that was the situation that was directly someone handing me the job, a peer saying, I don't want to do this, you do it. And also comedians can take each other on the road if you're, looking for an opener. I know Marla Schultz, for instance, opened for Chelsea for a couple of years. So there is a community that helps each other.
Yeah. It's separate from the people waiting in the back of the room for you to bomb and then make fun of you afterwards.
Look, it's a competitive field, and I'll tell you, it's never been more apparent to me than now in this last couple of years, getting more involved with the improv comedians, because that's a different vibe.
Yeah.
They really practice what they preach and what they're taught, which is your whole thing is about making the other person look good. Like, that's one of the principles of Viola Spolin, of like from the roots is like, what can you do to make the other person look good?
Right.
I didn't really find that so much in stand-up.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely more of a teamwork environment. It's a team sport. If you
Yes.
think about improv, it is a team sport versus, something that's much more individual.
Yes, which and you also, it's self-selecting, right? Like, one of the things that frustrated me as an actor was that I would do scene work and somebody wouldn't know his lines, and I say his because it usually was a guy. Like, they wouldn't have done their homework. They come to class unprepared. It would drive me absolutely insane. So I didn't have to worry about that. When I started doing stand-up, I'm like, oh, yay. I write it. I direct it. I style it. It's all me. I don't have to worry about anybody else. And, and then, of course, the flip side is you're desperately lonely. You're in hotel rooms by yourself. Like, you're a one-man band. So it's really, really tough.
But also the beauty of it, I mean, you've got that independence, but I think the beauty of stand-up is getting feedback immediately on
Right.
whatever it is you've created, because people are either laughing or they're not laughing, and
Right.
know immediately, versus, when I read a book, it might take a year for me to hear back from anybody, aside from friends, family, you talking about getting reviews and people talking about it in forums or whatever. The feedback isn't immediate. With stand-up, it's or you don't. I mean, it works or it doesn't.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I did, excuse me, I think you mentioned I did go on and write a couple books, but the first one was an edited anthology, so that was a whole process with other people. The second one was a full-on, like, I'm facing the wall with the index cards with the chapters and, gotta just plow through it, not knowing if it was going to be funny or not. And the book ended up, as Mike mentioned, so it's called Take My Spouse, Please. And it basically takes the tools. I wrote an article for Huffington Post, and it was called, like, Everything I Need to Stay Married, or 14 Things I learned as a comedian to help me stay married, or some catchy listicle thing that they titled it, and it was all taken from my UCLA syllabus. So I went through my UCLA syllabus and thought, oh, wait, because people always say, stand up, that's the hardest thing in the world. I could never do that. That's the hardest thing in the world to do. And I had been married 10 years, and it was, like, very, very challenging. We had young kids. It was not a good time in our marriage. And I was like, oh my God, really? Stand up is hard? Because I think maybe marriage a little harder, a little longer. And so that's what gave me the idea to go to my UCLA syllabus and look at, okay, so what are the tools for that hardest thing that people say, the hardest thing? And let me see where I bet there's crossover. And it was really fascinating to find out that there was. So that's what that book was all about. And when I went on tour, I went on like a 14-city book tour, and women would come up to me, make it out to my husband, take my stuff, because they thought it was about leaving, and it's not about leaving.
Yeah. Well, tell me what you learned about yourself during that process. So for the second book, where it's really all you, you're working independently. It's all on you. You've got to come up with the outline. You got to put the content together. You've got to find the agent. Agent gets the publisher. Walk me through that process for you and what you learned about yourself during that period of time.
Well, hindsight is very beautiful. I was fabulous the whole time. In truth, I think I was terrified a lot. It helped to have the article written, And because I had done the Afterbirth book, Afterbirth Stories You Won't Read in a Parenting Magazine. So I had written a book proposal for that. And I was always in writing class. And people would say, nonfiction writers, if you write a really strong proposal, you've written, you're on the way, because then you have the map. And so I wrote a really strong proposal. And it's so funny because part of the drive was that I had 2 children, and the younger one now was leaving for school. He was starting kindergarten. And I was like, oh my goodness, there is going to be a void that I want to fill ASAP. Like, I don't want that moment of like, now my kids, and then no. So I was very driven that summer, the summer before, to write this proposal. And I had the proposal and I had the article, and the article had done very well. So that's how I approached an agent. And they were like, okay, let's go try to sell it. And also, interestingly, I had been in someone else's anthology, a parenting anthology. I'm not going to remember the name. And the editor for that book was a Dartmouth College graduate. And so the women who put that book together said, you should talk to our editor. She went to Dartmouth. So I did reach out to her separately and said, hey, Rochelle was her name. I'm pitching a book. Would you be interested? And she was like, yeah, I'm interested. And so she ended up being my editor, and she was great. And that was for a company called Shambhala Press. Mm-hmm. And they are they're like a Zen yoga. So I was like their funny person, which was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Kind of fun.
Well, so
yeah.
I was going to say
that. Yeah, I was going to say, it's like, it's like showing up, talking, seizing opportunities. She could have said the editor's from Dartmouth, and I could have gone, oh, that's good for her. I wonder what class she was, and like left it at that. But again, I was very, very motivated because I wanted a project that I could do while the kids were at school. And I thought, this is going to be it. And the feedback had been so strong. It was such a good hook. Because like, who doesn't want to laugh? And it's true that couples who laugh together, like my thesis, what I set out to prove is couples who laugh together stay together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so it's the lessons that I'm taking away here from that are, number one, start with a strong idea, outline it, put that proposal together. And, once you have that and something to back it up with, right? So you had your HuffPo piece to back it up with, that, immediately shows an agent, which is not easy to find, but, or I mean, you could find them, but getting them to pay attention to is another story. You had all the pieces you had a solid proposition going into it, and then sort of not it wasn't a personal connection yet, but something in common with that editor who could help really make that happen for you. So like stars mm-hmm. really did align there, but it all starts with a solid premise, a solid idea that you've backed up somehow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, that's the secret to writing, I guess. I don't know.
I think the secret to writing is writing. That's what I've learned.
Just doing it every day. Yeah.
You just write. Writers write. It's so simple. And I teach a writing class to 85-year-olds now. And they write, man. During COVID, they've had lots of opportunity to write, and they do it, and they show up, and it's very, very satisfying for them.
Just thinking about that for a second, that's a group of people, and my parents are north of that age group. But that's a group of people who were you talk about people who were negatively impacted by this pandemic. The fact that they could, for the most part, not see or be in the same room with friends, family, loved ones, have a difficult time figuring out Zoom technology, FaceTime, all that stuff. I kind of, one of my big lessons from this pandemic is how do we make technology easier for people who are not, digitally savvy or digital natives. So I'm curious as to what you're hearing from your 85 plus crowd in their writing. Can you think about any themes that you're seeing consistently come up?
Well, the prompts are largely about their histories and, their first kiss or their first time they drove a car. So the idea is to get them out of their isolation by sharing stories about their lives. Now, I would say they were recently locked down again. So I actually went there. I was able to meet them. And then they went into lockdown again. And now the stories are very much about isolation and what it means to be their age and have this happen. And the travel that they're not going to get to do. I mean, it's very sad, but what's beautiful about this group is they have a very strong community now, and they feel very connected to each other, and they don't feel hopeless. And they attribute that to the writing, which is amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good segue to talk about Laughter on Call.
Laughter on Call!
Well, there it is. What's the backstory to Laughter on Call? How did this idea come to you?
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, Laughter on Call is another one of those crazy ideas that I had. So my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She was living on 72nd and Riverside. She was a full-on New York City businesswoman, executive, worked for Brown Harris Stevens. I don't know if you're familiar.
I've heard of them, yes. And but it sounds like she did move back to Manhattan after your time behind the Westport curtain.
100%. She went back she couldn't wait. She finagled her own apartments and stuff. She always worked in real estate. And so she was working for Brown Harris Stevens. And then things were starting, the wheels were starting to fall off there because she was miscalculating things. And I had gone to New York, and anyway, there were signs that something was not right. So then I got a call from her friend who she shared tickets to Lincoln Center Theater with. I have to drop all these things because no one in LA cares, but you guys might actually appreciate this. And she shared a subscription. And the woman called me and said, your mother is arguing with waiters and she doesn't know how to fill out a deposit slip. And I was like, well, wait a minute, the waiter, that's not news. But not filling out a deposit slip, that was really out of character. That was not my mother. So I flew to New York. She went to the Martha Stewart Center. Again, I'm just saying this in case anybody needs support. The Martha Stewart something for women on the Upper East Side. We got her evaluated. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. So we got staff in, and she quickly fired everybody. Then she took in a rescue dog. That was a crazy thought for someone in her condition. Anyway, cut to, it escalates. The disease progresses to the point where she's not even leaving her apartment anymore. And I was like, this is crazy. I had a sister in Boston. We were debating Boston, LA, Boston, LA. LA won because I had kids, young kids. So she came out here. I moved her into this beautiful place that had like a big chandelier. So it looked kind of like an Upper East Side building. And initially she was fine. And then she realized she wasn't leaving, and she became depressed and withdrawn and wasn't eating really. And I felt super, super guilty and terrible. Like I'd made a big mistake, and I was at my dentist, and because it's LA, she's also like a life coach. And I was like teary, and she wasn't drilling. And I was like, oh, I think maybe, I don't know what to do. I wish I could hire a comedian to cheer my mother up. And she said, oh, why don't you do that? You should do that. So I was like, I don't know. How do you do that? And then so I put up on Facebook looking for a comedian interested in gerontology paid gig because I wanted people to respond. And my phone rang. It was a comedian in New York, good friend of mine, who was like, wait a minute. I have a friend in LA who wants to work with old people. She's like sitting on park benches. You should call her. So I called that woman. She came and met my mother. She sat down. She got right in her face all the stuff that we train now. She got at eye level with her. She really took her in. And she was honest. And she had a New York accent, which helped because it was familiar. But she said, I know, you don't want to talk to me. No. You're probably thinking, who is this schmuck just talking to me and talking? So she said the word schmuck. Then my mother's eyes lit up and she said the word schmuck. Then the comedian, of course, repeated it. And they were having like a schmuck off. And it was so funny. And my mother was laughing, and I was like, okay, you're hired. Like, this is amazing. This is exactly what I want. So I hired the person for 8 hours a week. She could make her own schedule, just come in 8 hours a week. And it changed my mother's end of life. She opened up, she started eating, she joined the community, and it was amazing to witness. So I wrote an article about it for AARP magazine. And for writers, this is another interesting point. So I pitched the story to them, and they said, great, we're going to have a reporter call you to interview you. And I was like, no, I'm writing this piece. And they were like, what do you mean? And I said, I have 2 books, and I've written for major publications. Like, I'm going to write the piece. So I convinced them I could write the piece. And first they said, okay, well, we're just going to put it on the internet. We'll just put it on AARP.com. And I was like, okay, whatever. It's better than nothing. Then they read the piece and they said, you know what? We love it. Make it longer. And we're going to put it, and we're sending a photographer. So, again, like, it's inspiration meeting opportunity too. So that article, hundreds of responses from around the world. Please bring me a comedian in Pittsburgh and London. And so I launched a business, and that's kind of how that all started. And we started training. We had comedians being trained one-on-one to work one-on-one. And then we started getting requests for group, can you come in and do something interactive? And that was also an idea of mine, because I would go to these communities and it's like one guy playing Blown in the Wind while 10 people sleep. And I was like, we have to be able to do better than this. Like, What is this? So I had the idea, let's do some interactive stuff where we do storytelling and we get them to participate in the story. And so that was all kind of blooming. And then COVID hit. And so then it became a different challenge. Then, okay, now we can't get to them. So what are we going to do? So we started live streaming for our seniors. And what happened was we would do a half hour every day, 12 to 12:30, lunchtime laughter, and it was free. And what happened was people who were perfectly fine and cognitively together were showing up to laugh. And so it's all grown from there. Now we've done over 200 corporate events, and we're bringing teams together from around the world to connect through this idea of interactive virtual comedy.
So I've got 2 follow-up questions there. And the first is, why do you think it works? Like, thinking about, people who have cognitive impairments, what is it about making them laugh that makes them less depressed? It sounds like a funny question, but I'm just curious as to, like, why do you think it works so well?
Well, it's a myriad of things, right? Because, excuse me, there's just the physical response from laughter on the body of releasing serotonin, raising endorphins, bringing more oxygen. Like, there's just the chemical realities of the positive impact of laughter on the human body, which Norman Cousins wrote about in the 70s. Like, it's this cliche, laughter is the best medicine, la, 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 but there's actual very much science to support this. So there's that, just the non-pharmacological high, as I say, of the experience of laughter. But in terms of the dementia community, very few people are looking at them and taking them in and engaging with them. And I think that also gives us a feeling that you're being seen. People just want to be seen, and they want to feel heard and listened to. And that's being heard, right? Listen to. I'm a genius. And so it's kind of twofold. I think the impact is twofold.
And then, the other question I had is when you went to sort of like streaming shows, how, I've been very hesitant to do them because I feel like I need to be in a room with people. I need to hear the laughter. I need to hear the response. How is getting that feedback, through like a streaming performance? Like, what, I'm just curious as to your reactions to that, and if how well you can derive energy from the response you get.
Well, deriving energy, that's very, very hard in a 2-dimensional world. I will tell you, we don't do stand-up. We're not doing stand-up.
Yeah.
We are interactive. We're engaging the way you and I are engaging. And I've seen you laugh at some things that I've said. So I know that they've landed, right? See, that's not even funny. I really mean it. I'm like, do they laugh? You know, because that doesn't go away, right? And so when you're in gallery view, you can actually see what's landing, and also you're engaging. Everything that we do engages the people. You know, I always say, there's plenty of stand-up. Like, everybody's home, go watch Netflix, you know. But what we ask of people, to put their cameras on, put their sound on, and let's play some games. And it actually is very energizing, ultimately, because you are really feeling connected with people.
Got it.
But I've done like webinars where it's 500 people, and it's their name. You know, it's like I'm looking at a bunch of names. It's very, very hard.
It's hard.
Very, very hard. I told you I did that Clubhouse event yesterday with the Harvard professors and the Stanford professors, and they did like a case study on Laughter on Call. I was like, am I funny? Like, how do you? Anybody laughing? Is anybody laughing? Because there's no way to know. And then the quiet is the worst for a comedian. That, like, you say something is completely quiet, and it's like, and you know, I was trying so hard not to be self-deprecating in that crowd because they're all so elite. But like, my instinct is like, anybody laughing? You know? So, yeah, I try to stay away from the self-deprecation, but sometimes, like, that's my, so yeah, this is hard. This two-dimensional thing is hard. If you can get people to engage, then it works.
Yeah. So what's next for Laughter on Call? It sounds like it's growing from, helping, older folks, people with dementia to more corporate gigs. What's the roadmap look like?
Oh my, the roadmap. It's interesting because we're mapping out the roadmap because we're about to go out for more funding, because ultimately we kind of want to be the gold standard of creating connection through shared laughter in all areas of life. And one of the biggest challenges for HR right now is anxiety, depression, feelings of not belonging to a company, the eroding corporate culture because everybody's now decided they're going to work from home, which, although it hasn't affected productivity negatively, it definitely erodes your feeling of connection. There's lots of people that have been hired that have never met, that we're doing a lot of introductions. And then the other perk of this type of communication is that we're able to bring teams together from around the world. So we have the engineers in India on a call with the design people in Italy, with the marketing people in Mexico City, and then the CEO in Wisconsin, because everybody seems to have somebody in power in Wisconsin. It's genius. So we bring them all together and they get to interact with each other, and that would never happen in other circumstances. So this is really where we've put a lot of our focus right now, is being able to bring all these people together to create connection. But ultimately, or I would say yes, and ultimately, we want the corporate work to then underwrite the senior work. And we've also started working with people with autism, so to reach those people as well. But those two segments of the population tend to not have extra money. There's so much money being spent on care that's saying, hey, but what we do is like entertain and connect. They're like, yeah, but we can't because we got to pay caregivers or whatever. So that's kind of the full circle of it, is that we're trying to, for every 10 corporate events, then we have money to do one pro bono for a senior community. But we'll still send people out. It's just right now, there's too much uncertainty with the Delta and the variants and all that to do that.
So it sounds like a wicked smart business plan, though. I mean,
it's wicked smart.
It's wicked smart.
It is.
Wicked
it's
smart.
Great. Yeah. I mean, and there's been a lot written currently about laughter through COVID. What's emerged? There's Harvard Business Review, Forbes, The Atlantic. Two of the women on that call yesterday wrote a book called Humor Seriously, which is all the science behind why laughter is important in business and valuable. And they call it, a secret weapon, which is funny because our comedy, Laughter on Call, we are not using it as a weapon. There's no weapon. Like, we're all about, we always say we're laughing with company, not a laughing at company. And, we use affiliative humor for any of you who actually are interested in studying this subject matter. There's sarcasm that distances and criticism, and then there's like affiliative humor that makes people feel better. And that's always been, going back to the story of the puppets at the dinner table, that has always been my thrust, if you will, is to help people feel better. I want people to feel better than after an interaction.
Yeah, that's a great way to bring it full circle because, I think comedy works best for me if I'm not making fun of somebody, or if I'm in a room watching other comedians and, it's not destructive, it's constructive. You go to a new talent showcase or something, and if there's 10 comics, 8 are guys, 9 of them are talking about how crappy they are in bed. Like it's new. Well, I mean, this is coming from
Connecticut,
where I am in Connecticut, which is very progressive. But then there's a lot of anger in it too. There's a lot of anger at oneself or anger at one's spouse, and I always try to be like, okay, well, how can I? What I want people to know or feel after I've attempted to entertain them is a little bit better about themselves.
Right.
It's I want them to feel positive. I don't want them to feel negative, because that's easy to do too. That's why I sort of like cringe at roast humor or insult humor, and people do it. There are some people who can do it very well. It's not real for me. Like it's not. It's just not me. But this notion of like using humor to address fear, address unhappiness. Like you at the dinner table with the finger puppets when everyone in the family is, upset about the move to Westport. And let's face it, who wouldn't be upset about a move to Westport? But I used to work in Westport, so I know what those people are like.
I wouldn't be upset about it now, though, because it's so beautiful.
Oh, God, it's beautiful. Are you kidding me? On the Saugatuck River, it's gorgeous. The Black Duck Cafe was one of my favorite spots, and it's still slowly sinking into the Saugatuck River. But but there's a way to use humor to build people up and to cut the tension of a situation without breaking somebody down, and that's where I think humor kind of works best. And I'll admit to using it as a defense mechanism to avoid having real difficult conversations. But, it's, I don't know. It's like a personality characteristic some of us have, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, at its best, it should lend perspective, like this isn't going to be forever. It could be worse. We could be la, 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 like not to minimize someone's feelings, but to always contribute a perspective that you're not considering because you're so deep in your thing. That's where I think comedy is really, really helpful, and to break tension, obviously, because what that does is, again, it says, look, it's not always going to be like this. Like, let's just pull back the camera a little bit. Like, it's okay. It's okay.
So now for the really hard questions.
The really hard questions.
If you were stranded on a desert island, right? And you could take the work of, a few comedians with you, whether it's specials or whatever. Who are you taking? Who's coming, whose work is coming on the desert island with you?
Okay, definitely Chris Rock. He's my number one. Maybe I would take Seinfeld just so I could analyze his joke structure, because he's such a brilliant, technician.
Yeah.
God, that's 2 men. I need a woman. Help! I would say that I appreciate what Hannah Gadsby did. I don't know that I would call it stand-up per se, but I appreciate her courage to just lay bare the truth. I'm a big truth person. I'm trying to think. I don't know. Let's see. That might be my three that I would think of in this moment. But
Okay.
it could change anytime. I also really still love Janine Garofalo, even though I haven't seen her do stand up in years. She was so smart. So I'd love to hear what she's doing now.
Sure. And another hard question.
Oh God.
Because I have to ask the hard ones. Thinking about, your younger self, and whether this is Dani with the finger puppets or, Dani getting on a stage for the first time, trying to make it in the business as a comedian. If you could write a letter to that self, what kind of advice would you give a younger Dani?
I would say invest in a community. That was something that I was on the road for probably 15 years. I had an apartment in New York. I had an apartment in LA. I was always kind of bouncing. And I think, and that's probably a consistent challenge with the writing, acting, producing, direct. Like I have a restless spirit. And I think it would have served me better to invest fully in something. Not that I regret. I mean, I've had a really cool, interesting, creative life. But to achieve the kind of excellence that I expect of myself, I should have just slammed in on something. And I don't, again, that's not to minimize what I've done. And I believe that I do have a sense that, where everything is happening the way it's supposed to happen. Every previous thing has led to the next thing. And if I hadn't written the book, I wouldn't have thought and taken the tools of comedy out of the clubs and into humanity. I would not have had the idea to get a comedian for my mother, which would not, which led to all of this other work that I really do find very rewarding. So maybe taking a deep breath, like right now, I should take a deep breath, like, because and I noticed, I just brought my son to New York last weekend, man, I come by my restlessness authentically. Like when you live in California and then you go to New York, like it's a different rhythm. And so I was always working against my kind of East Coast, New York instincts of impatience. So patience would be another one. If I could just have some patience, I don't know. That's what I would recommend. Have some patience. It's going to work out. It's going to be what it's going to be. Stop wasting time blaming yourself. Like that's one of my favorite activities.
Blaming yourself.
Yeah, like I said, if I do a set and I can't remember the laughs, I can only remember, well, there was that one person in the front row that didn't think I was funny. What up? And why? And then I listened to the set and I'm like, oh, I actually got a lot of laughs. There was a couple that didn't work. But my brain, unfortunately, is wired for the mistakes.
But do you think from a creative perspective, do you think it's better to be wired that way in the sense that, you're going to be more attuned to what didn't work and how to make it better versus taking it for granted?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's got to be a balance. I think I remember there were certain comedians, I don't remember their names, and the improv in LA, there's like the showroom and then there's a bar. And women, you'd watch this person completely bomb, like completely like couldn't buy a laugh. And then from the stage to the bar, when she walked in the bar, we'd be like, I had them like right here. Like it was amazing. And I would be like, that's so interesting that's how you spun that. I've never been able to do that. But so I think there's healthy self-reflection and analysis. But I don't think all the darkness is necessary. Although I've never met a creative person who doesn't struggle with that. Like, it seems to come with the territory to always be thinking, how can I do this better? To care that much, to say, I've got to be able to do better than this. And it does drive me even into my 50s, which, like, you would think I would relax already, like, relax. But I haven't yet.
It's also the New Yorker in you.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe it is. Maybe
Could
it is
be.
regional.
So as we wrap up here, Dani, anything to promote, anything upcoming that you want the Uncorking a Story listeners to know about, hear about, consider attending, or consider reading?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So August 19th, we're actually doing a free Boost Your Social Skills event. And so if you go to the website, laughteroncall.com, come and register, and we're going to have fun and get a little taste of what we do, and also help people, because, you know, as we've all been isolated. So as we come back, people are like, oh, you know what? I kind of like my mouse, kind of want to communicate. So we're going to play some games. You can also buy this fantastic book. I don't know. Is it showing up backwards?
Oh, I can see it very clearly.
Okay. So this book, super fun. Not a science book. It is, I have to say that because of that call yesterday with all the social scientists. It's not a science book. It's kind of part memoir and part advice. And it really does work. It definitely helps me in my marriage for sure, and has helped a lot of people, and it's fun. And there's great anecdotes in it as well. And then if you know anyone who's having a baby, this still holds up. Afterbirth, stories you won't read in a parenting magazine. And you'll recognize a lot of the writers in it. Who is that fancy guy? Andrew McCarthy.
Oh,
Andrew
sure.
McCarthy. Yeah. So there's lots of fun people in here that you might recognize. Tom Shalhoub. Remember, you know Tom Shalhoub? Moon Unit Zappa. There's really fun stories and very honest, and spans from birth to like leaving for college, the stories. And so that's a fun gift and very inexpensive on Amazon right now. And yeah, check out Laughter on Call if you have anybody struggling with dementia, Alzheimer's, you want to get some advice, some ideas, please feel free to reach out. Dani at laughteroncall.com. That is my service to the world. I'm happy to share what I learned and help in any way that I can. And I think that's it. I think
there
that's all
we go.
I have to promote.
All right. Well, Dani, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good luck, everyone. Keep the laughter going.